Well, tonight I want to share with you one of my passions, and that's knowledge about Pythagoras. Pythagoras has largely influenced just about every Western mystery tradition. And as was pointed out, Pythagoras also has a lot of Eastern influences himself. Right. As we were told, the name of the lecture for this evening is Number, Cosmos and Harmonia. Right. I picked this little saying to actually set the theme for this evening's talk. And the ancients, who were superior to us and dwelt nearer to the gods, have handed down a tradition that all things that are said to exist consist of one and of many, and contain in themselves the connate principles of limit and unlimitedness. And Pythagoras really based his mathematics and his philosophy on these teachings, on this concept. When we think about Pythagoras, we generally just think of his theorem of the right-angled triangle, which they forced on us as children in high school and primary school until we hated it. To Pythagoras, that little theorem was the basis of the architecture of the universe, and it was all based on ratios, or the relationship of one thing to another. Right? As it says in the middle there, 3 is to 4 is to 5. If you forget everything we learned about the right-angled triangle and all the difficult stuff they taught us at school, and just remember 3 is to 4 is to 5. Pythagoras loved ratios, and we'll go into how he explains these ratios are intrinsic to everything around us. Pythagoras actually began his life in Turkey. His family actually moved to Greece because it was better for business there. But Pythagoras ended up being a gifted and talented student, so his parents, being wealthy, actually gave him a lot of money to pursue his studies. He went from Greece, after he learned everything he could from the teachers there, over to Egypt. And when he had studied architecture, astronomy, mathematics, science, chemistry, under the tutelage of the Egyptians, and had soaked up all the knowledge that they could give him, he started to ask them where their knowledge came from. Right? And Pythagoras actually made a journey to the seat of Hindus, that's right, to where modern-day Tibet is, and he spent some years studying over there. We know that Pythagoras left Greece for a period of 20 years to further his studies around the world. When Pythagoras actually came back to Greece, not many people know this, he had all this knowledge and he just wanted to teach, and nobody would listen to him, not one. Couldn't get any students. In the place of the world that was famous for its mystery schools and its teachers, he couldn't get a start as a teacher. So what he did was he went down to the slave market and he bought a slave. And he actually said that slave's main job was to learn. And every day the slave learnt one lesson from Pythagoras, included in his daily chores. Eventually, Pythagoras said, "Okay, I think I've taught you enough." And the slave said, "Okay, well, I'm going to pay you now to teach me, because the stuff that I'm learning from you is so valuable, it will gain me my freedom." And it did. Pythagoras actually ended up granting that slave his freedom, and he became his first teacher in his mystery school. But when we think about the images of slavery that are pushed at us through Hollywood today, it's very different to how slavery existed back then. Slavery back then was very much like employment today. You actually went in and checked in with your boss. You performed a certain amount of hours of work. You were able to earn your own money. Right? Your boss would often give you money to invest on his behalf in different businesses and things like that. So this slave of Pythagoras's ended up making so much money from what Pythagoras had taught him as part of his lessons that he ended up being able to pay Pythagoras for his lessons. People began to hear about that, and then they started sending their children, their young sons, their young daughters to Pythagoras to be taught. But when he came back from Greece, from his travels abroad, at 40 years of age, he actually set up mystery schools. He set up one in Greece. He became politically active in Greece. They got very nervous there. So he left Greece because of tyrants, and he moved to Crotona in Italy. And in Crotona in Italy, again, he experienced huge persecution of the knowledge that he brought back. um, he actually put forward the idea that government would be best if it could actually be advised by somebody who wouldn't take bribes, right? And people from his school were actually taught to be of very, very high principles. So he actually recommended several students from his school to be set above the governments as an advisory body, but separate. The governments were terrified by this because they would lose their income from their bribes. So they went and they learned at school, they learned all the books that Pythagoras had written. We have no written records written by Pythagoras himself these days. Right? And they went about setting out a whole lot of propaganda against his teachings. The one that has come down to us today is the fear of the pentagram, which was the symbol you had to draw, right, in order to gain entrance to his mystery school. And so we'll talk in depth about that. But in this book, if you ever get a chance to get hold of this book, if you like a little bit of deep reading, but it's set out very plain English. It goes into Pythagoras' life in depth. It's an anthology of people who've written about his life, his teachings. It's probably the best one you can get. It's written by a gentleman called Guthrie. He wrote it about 1919, 1920, translated most of it from the Greek and compiled it together. And in that it says, if Western civilization exists as a series of footnotes to Plato, then Plato exists as footnotes to Pythagoras. But most of what we understand now in our Western culture as fields of study come from what Pythagoras set up in that original school. And what were these valuable lessons that Pythagoras had to teach? These are some of the topics that were taught in the mystery school. Pythagoras didn't just teach mathematics. He was the first one to actually break down fields of study, right, into different categories. And the categories that were studied there were mathematics, obviously, science, astronomy. Our theory of music as we know it today in the West comes from Pythagoras. Right? We also, his main goddess that he worshipped was Hygiena. Right? So a lot of our Western medicine techniques actually come from what was actually originally taught in his schools. Health, politics, and egalitarianism. So he was, everybody understands here what egalitarianism is. That all men are created equal, all women are created equal. Women were admitted equally into his mystery school. In fact, Pythagoras' wife was one of his students. Pythagoras didn't get married until he was 70 years of age. So a lot of his teachings that he actually taught early in his life come across as being very male chauvinistic, as you would imagine a dyed-in-the-wool bachelor to teach about, the ideas about marriage and women's place in society. But he actually married one of his students. She was a very young, I think she was about 18, when she actually persuaded him. She badgered him to the point where she used to go around and tell him how cruel he was, that he would not let people love him. Right? And it was very reminiscent of the stories of Shakti winning Shiva's love. Here we have this old ascetic who's, he thinks he can't love, and here it comes a motivating force that teaches him how to love. And what we know about Pythagoras' teachings after that point are very soft. Love actually softened his teaching. When you entered his mystery school, it was tough. For the first year, you weren't allowed to speak to anybody. Right? He said that all of his students coming in had to accept the fact that they knew nothing, and they had nothing worthy to say to anybody. So you weren't allowed to speak to anybody. Pythagoras was also the first Westerner to be called a philosopher. He actually called himself a philosopher. Philo meaning love of learning, or the principle of love of learning. Pythagoras' main teaching, the reason why he's so known for mathematics, was that he taught that numbers were alive, that nature around us could be represented by numbers. When we think of numbers today, we think of quantitative values, that 1 is 1 of something, 2 is 2 of something. Well, to Pythagoras, each of these monads, which was the general name for each of them, the first 10 digits, actually was